We all know elephants are some of the biggest creatures in the animal kingdom. In these times, people are lucky to be able to get a good close-up look at these gentle giants. They can be seen on safaris, in amusement parks, and in zoos everywhere. Some elephants are taken from the wild and selectively bred so they can produce the best offspring. This might bring much joy to people, but is our joy really more important than other animals? Even with many animals being bred in captivity, thankfully there are still many animals that are left to their own devices in the wild. Elephants like this seldom come into contact with humans. In general, these animals are completely independent of humans and should be left alone. However, there are still certain situations where action is needed. This is such a case. An infant elephant has gotten itself stuck. The herd had no other choice to get the attention of humans so they could step in and help. When rescue workers came to the scene that the elephants guided them to, they had to act fast. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. India has many remote regions where elephants run wild. Even without being seen much, there's no mistaking that they demand respect. The locals understand and leave the elephants to their privacy, and each can, therefore, live peacefully. Elephants are peaceful if unprovoked and aren't a danger to anyone, but if they feel threatened, they can exhibit incredible strength on their attacker. Seeing elephants from the Indian towns is a rare and beautiful sight. At the most southern part of India lies a river called the Unorganized. On either side of the river are dense forests that house the proud elephants. The local workers in the area have befriended the giants, but still know to keep their distance. The marching herd would pass by every day, so there wasn't anything different on this particular day. But something was wrong this time. As they marched along to the Unorganized forest, an infant elephant got into trouble. Since the infants were not used to crossing the river, the herd had to follow along the tight banks. This turned out to be challenging for the small elephant. The small elephant was only 1/6 the size of a full-grown elephant. When the herd decided it was time to cross the body of water, the poor calf lost its footing and slipping into a gap between the river and the bank. The calf couldn't get itself out. The ground was slippery with mud, leaving the infant immobilized in the gap. The herd became unorganized when they saw the baby in the hole. The hole was way too narrow for the baby to climb out, not to mention how slippery it was. To make matters even worse, the calf was getting tired out from the batter-like mud sticking to its feet. It felt like walking on semi-set concrete. The baby did the only thing that it could do at that moment. It started to sadly cry out in fear. Its cries carried so much weight that the whole herd began to panic. The only thing the herd of elephants could do was watch as poor infant kept attempting to get out. The calf kept trying its best to get out while the rest of the herd watched, motionless. Then something occurred to them all at once. They started making a huge commotion. As the minutes turned into hours, the danger and imminent death of the baby was becoming a much bigger possibility. However, it seemed that their efforts to do something were not working. Like humans, elephant families are close and intact, and all members are deeply valued. Wherever they go, they make sure that nobody, not one, is left behind. That said, when one of them falls into danger, the rest of the group will not rest until a solution is found, even if it means putting their own lives at risk. The movements and brays weren't just because they were screaming for help. It was because they too were losing their own energy and were in pain. Several hours had already passed, and the situation was not improving. The little elephant was losing its consciousness, and the sun's heat was making everything worse. The cry of anguish was thunderous and heard across the forest. Humans cannot easily understand the way animals speak, But whoever heard this collective cry would know that it was inspired out of love and support for their family in trouble. From a distance, the local community had heard the noises. They couldn't figure out where it was coming from at first and what it had meant. Others thought it was noises from the nearby traffic, while others thought they were just hearing loud music being played. But when the frantic braying continued, the people knew that it wasn't just regular noise. Something was wrong. The strange sounds made some locals terrified, but they were also hard to ignore. Some decided to rush towards the noise to find out where it was coming from and why it was being made. A group of brave souls ran towards the direction of the trees. As they grew closer, the sound became louder. They started to guess that it was coming from a herd of elephants, but they still didn't know why. The first instinct was to think that the elephants were being surrounded by feline predators. The locals knew that they could also be killed within seconds if they were spotted, but the cries had been so loud that they had to find out why they were being made. Elephants screaming was a rarity, and their curiosity got the better of their fear. As more and more residents followed the first group to find out what was going on, the frontliners mustered more courage to get closer. Whether it was a predator or a group of wild elephants, each one of them was also in danger, but they could not stop trying to get near. They tried digging in the area around the hole in a bid to widen the space where they could work. They couldn't dig exactly where the calf was at the risk of endangering it more. When the hole was finally widened, the next challenge was getting the fallen elephant out. The goal was to create a small path where the little one could slowly crawl out. However, this task is easier said than done. The excavating machine had successfully dug enough space for the calf to move, so there was room for the locals to step in and join the efforts. Sure, help was great, but they all needed to act carefully. One wrong move could send the entire operation into failure and even expose people to more risk. All the noise and vibrations the machine was making was a disturbance for sure, but the wild elephants had appeared to stay calm in the heat of it all. It was already the second day of the rescue, and not one of the elephants had left the scene. The sight of the whole pack keeping a united front while waiting for their little one to be out safely inspired the people to move forward. While everybody was busy with their respective tasks, the machine suddenly stopped working. The silence was deafening, and their hearts started to race when the vibrations halted. Something was wrong. The operator tried several times to restart the engine, but it refused to cooperate. There was smoke coming from the excavator, signs that it had overheated. It had been working for hours trying to dig a wider hole around the baby elephant, and it had finally given up. Luckily, one of the locals was an expert on engines and offered to have a look at the machine. When the older elephants realized what was happening, they started to trumpet in unison again. The rescuers had to get closer to the baby elephant to ensure that it was still holding on, giving it food and drink as needed. Fortunately, it also seemed unrelenting about giving up. The grateful elephants continued on their procession. But that day, everyone knew that what happened would burn in their memories forever. The herd of wild elephants began to look smaller and smaller to the eyes of the villagers. They began making their way into the forests. Nobody knew when they would be able to get as close to the wild beast as they were that day. More than half of the elephants in the entire Asian continent live in India. These wild beasts are very dear creatures to the Indian people, and they are everywhere. Considering how large Asia is, you can only imagine the number of elephants living in this humble country. There are domesticated elephants almost everywhere, and 20% of them play major roles in local businesses. For this reason alone, the Indian people give importance to the animals' welfare and survival. Aside from aiding their living, the elephants are also closely tied to the country's culture and religion. Perhaps that explains why the locals couldn't ignore the scream of help from the massive beasts. Once all the work was done, the wildlife officials gave a message to thank all the volunteers. The officials were happy that ordinary people didn't think twice about helping them and the poor animal. Despite some of them having lost a day at work, the atmosphere was light and merry. The people shook hands before they headed home. It was a rare occurrence in the village, and the locals knew they would be telling their kids about what happened in the years to come. Tell us what you think about this story and share it with your friends. It might inspire them and brighten their day. If you enjoyed this story, you might like this one about a rich dad who was ashamed of his waiter son until one day he surprised him with his dedication to his work.